Hey everyone, I'm Rather Incoherent, and this is the Return to the Forgotten Age. I just finished playing this on the channel, and I wanted to go through and review what I think it changes. Part of this is just as like a product review, but part of it is because I want to more intricately understand what exactly changes in the Return to sets. I'll be doing it in a lot more detail than I have previously. I've actually gotten out every single card that's changed over here. But before I go into the specifics of this, because obviously there's going to be a lot of spoilers, I want to give a brief spoiler-free version. Do I recommend Return to the Forgotten Age? The answer is yes. I recommend it more than any other Return to set, and it's the only Return to that I might recommend over the original product, where I might tell a new player, if you're comfortable with the additional setup rules that you're going to get with these little Return to cards, you should just play it with Return to immediately. That's because it fixes a lot of the issues I have with the original Forgotten Age, vastly improves many of the scenarios, and just generally, in my opinion, the biggest improvement of any of the Return to sets. First, let's get into what's changed for the event sets that you're cycling out. All of these events are staying the same. And as always with Return to sets, things are going to stay the same thematically even when they're replaced, and what you're going to see at the end is still going to be hard to differentiate from your memory of the original one, but it does change in big, meaningful ways. These are the event sets that are being changed out. I'm going to go through them and talk about them. Coming over to the cards that are being replaced, Merging Timelines replaces the Rotting Remains variant of this set, and I despise it. A Tear in Time is just a Rotting Remains, but you can choose to lose actions instead. That's like a very reasonable, not that difficult card. Merging Timelines is something that you literally cannot play around and has a very random and impactful result. You discard the top 5 cards of your deck, and then for every card in your hand that matches one of the discarded cards by title, discard that card from your hand and lose 1 action. Shuffle each weakness discarded by this effect into your deck. This is brutal. It just says discard a random number of cards from your hand and lose an equivalent number of actions. And there's really no playing around it. It's especially apparent in my campaign, where my way of fighting is by using Bloodright over and over again. This is brutal. More than once in that campaign, I discarded my Bloodrights and lost actions and went from being able to handle any threat that came out to just being dead in the water, desperately trying to draw so that I could find a solution to this problem I now had. It's completely random, and it's so high impact that randomness is borderline intolerable for me. The good news is it's within the rules to swap out and mix and match these replacement sets. So I won't ever be playing with Merging Timelines again. That card is just a Tear in Time now. Lost in Time is, in my opinion, just a less interesting version of Tindalos Alpha, and I actually like the change quite a lot. However, thematically, the Tindalos Alpha does seem a little bit weird in the campaign. This replacement is actually a little bit weird to me. They don't actually really correspond with what the original set did. Lost in the Wilds is a 3-head test where you just can't move if you fail. And Low on Supply is the Peril, where you either make everyone lose 2 resources, take a damage, or choose and discard an asset you control. And the replacement set just does very different things. I actually like that because the original set is honestly very, very soft. Best Laid Plans is a really iconic card to me that is one of my favorite cards in terms of decision making. It's brutal, but ultimately giving you fair choices. And Resentful Wilds I initially disliked because it kind of does say gain a random amount of vigilance over the course of the campaign. However, despite saying that, I like that it's harder for you to make clear plans around what's going to happen with Vengeance, since it's a little bit more out of your hands. That doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, and I do like that. This set is a huge improvement to the scenarios, and it's very, very impactful. I knew that Vengeful Serpent was replacing a monster, but I couldn't tell you anything about Fang of Yig because he's not memorable to me. He's just a 3-fist, 3-health guy, and he has an effect, sure, but it doesn't really matter to me. The Vengeful Serpent is one of the most iconic monsters in Forgotten Age for me, because he's such an important resource tax. You just have to be able to kill this big pile of snakes 6 times. If you use melee weapons, you might not even remember these guys, but if you're like me and you're using Bloodrights, they're one of the most important enemies in the set. And then moving on to the other stuff that's replaced, this is either draw 2 weaknesses or get poisoned. That's just less interesting to me to a potentially very difficult test to get poisoned. And Snake Scourge is a card I despised. I didn't even remember it existed till I was setting out these cards. This just says your fighter can't fight anymore for almost every fighter in the game except Nathaniel Chow. Just a random chance that your fighter cannot fight every turn, and that's brutal. I'd like to comment on Serpent Guardian, but he failed to spawn every single time that I've ever seen him in both Return to Forgotten Ages I've seen. So I guess I would comment, it seems kind of mean to have a card this high variance, where if you're winning it usually does nothing, and if you're losing you can summon a beefy threatening monster. But I really don't have any informed opinion about Serpent Guardian. It also replaces the Acolyte set, and generally anytime Acolytes get replaced, I like it. They're just a more flavorfully interesting, slightly different mechanical spin on the Acolytes. Stolen Mind in particular stands out as being an actually threatening Wizard of the Order, whereas most of the time the Wizard of the Order variants just get killed immediately, including the original Wizard of the Order. In Brotherhood Acolyte, is an Acolyte that does nothing when the first one shows up, but as more of them spawn, you'll realize you needed to deal with them. From Another Time is interesting, but it's just a mysterious chanting variant. I have no hard opinions about it. And lastly, there are 4 alternative places you might have when you make your Explore decks. And honestly, with most of these places, I have no particular opinion about the new locations. They have different numbers on them, they have different effects, and generally I like that they give you more effects for each of the supplies. But none of it particularly matters to me, it's just new locations to mix things up. I don't really have strong opinions about it. But there's one more thing happening in every scenario that's very important, and it's going to be in these little Return To cards. It's going to be the instructions at the bottom for making your Explore deck and using the Check Your Supplies ability. The Check Your Supplies ability on the Expedition Camp you can use from any location. All of the Check Your Supplies in every location, or every scenario rather, are going to get this, and it makes them actually relevant because you can use them outside the starting location on the map. The other thing it does, the more important thing it does, honestly, is that you no longer include encounter cards when you first build your Explore decks. Instead, you get this forced ability at the bottom in most of the scenarios, that after successful exploration ends, shuffle the top card of the encounter deck into the exploration deck. And this means that when you start off, exploring goes very smoothly, and it only becomes a difficult decision that's likely to have penalties as the scenario progresses, and you're more well equipped to deal with those penalties. It feels much, much better to play. There are a couple scenarios that don't shuffle new cards in, and I'll talk about them when I get to them. But as you can see with Untamed Wilds, very little was changed, and in my opinion, that's because Untamed Wilds, aside from general problems with the Explore deck, didn't need much to change to be improved upon. Coming over to Doom of Vestili, we have the Harbinger of Elutia getting swapped out. The original Harbinger is a 3/3, the new Harbinger is a 2/4, but once he gets dropped to half health, he's going to flop to 4/2 instead, meaning that when you're not trying to kill him, he's hard to evade, but if you are trying to kill him, he's hard to fight. And that's a mechanic I like. It adds decision making. In our campaigns, we were always thinking about how to deal 10 damage to him in the earlier scenarios, so that it could be easier to evade when he showed up later, because we really don't want to kill the guy if I have a lot of vengeance. However, there's a huge change happening in Doom of Vestili that I couldn't even put up here. The map isn't the same. Every single location basically is replaced. Some of them, like Chamber of Time, isn't actually different, but the connections change, which is why it had to be replaced. Now, throughout the campaign, you have things that build up to Sealed Passageway, which is you can find the Key of Vestili by doing a lot of different things throughout the campaign. And this essentially lets you skip all of this scenario, just go straight to the end by using the key in that location, which is very, very cool. Something worth mentioning is just having a bigger map makes the scenario better. It makes the chase sequence at the end harder, and that makes it more engaging and more interesting. This has 2 more locations total. Having these big interlocks here as well makes exploring harder in this last section. You're very likely to go somewhere that isn't exactly where you wanted to go, whereas with this one, it's relatively hard to be forced to explore too many extra times. Something weird is that the idea of changing out the entire temple with the Return To set really appeals to me. I don't know why. The idea that like you come here thinking you've explored it before, you know what it is, and you're just wrong is really appealing to me. The Snake Pit is the epitome of that, a location where if you explore into it without binoculars at your location, you're just going to spawn 3 pit vipers and either get poisoned or piss off Yig. Those are your only options. Beyond Snake Pit and the general increase in map size being a good thing, and the overarching Key of Vestili plotline, I think that the minor differences in locations aren't really important to me, much like with this set here. But Doom of Vestili, I think, is really meaningfully improved. I didn't mention it with Untamed Wilds, but I think it's vastly improved as well by the new Explore rules. The first time we ever played the Untamed Wilds, we just immediately got overdrawn at the first location and couldn't explore, and we're like, alright, cool. Next time it's Leo's turn, maybe he'll break us out and we can play the game, because no one else has even 3 fists. So just having that not happen is a big improvement. With Threads of Fate, the big thing that changes is you get an entire new agenda. And that's just really good. It's a degrees of completion scenario. Adding more things to try to complete is really cool. It also adds a really cool ally. They're very, very good in terms of economy to soak spent, and their effect allows you to really meaningfully interact with the Explore deck in a way that I quite enjoy. The big thing about this set of decks isn't just that it can add like a new parlay test and new explorers. It does do that. This location and this parlay check aren't really important to me. What's important to me is that there is a 50-50 chance on the second act you might get a location or a guy, or you might get something like this. where you summon the Harbinger. And it turns out that both options have the ability to summon the Harbinger. Regardless of which route you go down, there's just a 50% chance that you summon the Harbinger, and that's actually something that I really like. Adding just another chance for things to be meaningfully different is always something good. This is a very high variant scenario because of the randomized agendas, or randomized acts rather. But summoning the Harbinger as a 50% chance on your G act is actually a really cool point of decision making that I like quite a lot. Unlike all of the other ones, you might really not want to advance Act 2G. And I like that. I like everything that was added to Threads of Fate. I think it meaningfully improves the scenario. The big thing that Boundary Beyond does to improve its scenario is when you build the Explore deck, you don't include the encounter cards that you do in the original one. And because you're replacing locations here, and there are 2 of each location in the Explore deck, originally, odds were 5-2 that you would draw an event card instead of explore successfully. That sucks. That's terrible, and everyone hated it. Boundary Beyond still isn't a good scenario, but it's much better without that problem. And unlike the other ones, you don't add cards when you successfully explore in this one. That's not mentioned anywhere, you just keep going. It improves the scenario a lot. There's also a new set of locations for when you first start in the present day. I don't actually care about them very much. They change what you're doing, but you have a 50-50% chance to get the original or the new one. And it's really just similar but different requirements so that it's harder to map out what to do in the scenario. I have no strong opinions about this. I think I like that it exists. I like variance and making it harder to map out scenarios, but I don't really care one way or the other. Boundary Beyond is vastly improved. Still not a scenario I like, but no longer a scenario I hate. Heart of the Elders, still a scenario I hate. I say still, but I never actually played it my first time through. I can only assume we got the rules wrong because I have no idea how we got full 6-pillar completion on Boundary Beyond with our relatively new players. That said, what this scenario does is it's going to add the Feathered Serpents, which are a vengeance creature with X, which is the number of pillar tokens you got, so 0 to 5, as their fight. And then you can auto-evade them if you had the Mysterious Scepter and deal its damage to another enemy at your location. And we changed out the Winged Serpent. Now you can deal damage to it to stop it as well, which is basically just turning into the Ancient Watcher, and it has much more reasonable numbers than it used to. It's also no longer alert. So, on the one hand, this is the Ancient Watcher, don't you lie to me. But on the other hand, the original one was terrible, and I don't care that this one looks a lot like the Ancient Watcher, it's a vast improvement. But to my eyes, I think the Feathered Serpent crosses a line for me. Without the Feathered Serpent, almost every enemy in the deck is a Vengeance enemy, and that's still very annoying. But if you have the Feathered Serpent and don't have the Mysterious Scepter, for me that crosses the line where every enemy you draw is just a Vengeance enemy you aren't supposed to kill, with like one exception. And at that point, when you have so many Vengeance enemies, it really does feel like a gimmick scenario, and it doesn't feel good to me. I dislike Heart of the Elders because the just constant Vengeance enemies is very unfun to me in a non-engaging way. But if that's not an issue for you, if it's something you find engaging, it could actually be argued that this is just improving the scenario. Going to Heart of the Elders Part 2, once again, we're doing all the normal things we do with the Explore deck, where you start with none, you shuffle them in. That was happening here as well, I believe. And we've got different locations that you can start with. I don't even know off the top of my head if you can start with them or if you do start with them. But as is always the case for me, I just don't particularly care about alternate locations. For some reason, it doesn't matter to me in the same way that alternate setup or alternate enemies works. Alternate locations is like, yeah, sure, you change them, but it's still the same stuff. It's still a shroud value and a set of clues and a vaguely similar effect almost every time. So again, I won't be going over these specifically. It's just added variance to a scenario, which I like, but has no real strong feelings for me. Heart of the Elders Part 2, however, is still massively improved by the new Explore rules. The City of Archives has actually just got an entire extra wing now, which is really nice because you still only need to get 6 of these things done to finish the scenario. Having the option to go up to 8 just gives you 2 that you can say you don't want to do, and that's just a better. That means that your group isn't being bullied into either suffering a penalty or trying in vain to pass a check that they weren't designed for. This is much better design. I like the feeling of the bigger facility as well. I really like it. The captive subjects are just the enemy for this wing. Every wing already has one, so I don't have strong opinions about it. It just needed to exist, and I'm glad it does. I think Cities of Archives goes from a potentially high variant scenario that could punish your group a lot for having bad compositions in ways that aren't intuitive, to just being a pretty good scenario, even if it is a gimmick scenario, because of this change, because of the extra wing. Depths of Yath is a fantastic scenario, and it's got very little changed in it. Very, very little changes when you go into Depths of Yath. The big thing is that the Perils of Yath is going to be in the Explore deck every single depth, and you're going to have to either do one of two things when you find it. Cancel your Explore or take horror or damage equal to the current depth level. In the earlier depths, that lightning just deals a bit of chip damage to you, but as you get to the later depths, depths 3 and 4, you might just be forced into losing an action. It's a minor change, but it's one I really, really like, and I think it does improve the scenario. And besides, Depths of Yath is straight fire anyway, you don't need to improve the scenario that much. It was already one of the best scenarios in the set, and it remains that way. Perils of Yath is only helping, but it didn't need help to begin with. Unfortunately for Shattered Aeons, I feel like I can't say anything other than the scenario has been made worse. The encounter sets may have been changed in meaningful ways. Let's go quickly see what changed, if I think anything has improved. Oh no. It's this set, isn't it? Yeah, it changes out this set and the Cultist, and then it does the stuff specific to this card. It doesn't do anything else. That's a bad look. Alright. So what this does is it incorporates that new card that I despise, changes out some minor flavor things that aren't a big deal, and it adds Unknowable Past, as well as a couple new locations for a bit of variance. As always, no strong opinion on new locations. Good news is that it fixes the Explore deck. So that's great. It's only using the Otherworld locations and the Shadow locations, not putting a bunch of event cards in to begin with, or encounter cards rather. And it's using the shuffle the top card in when you successfully explore it set. I'm fine with all of that. That's always an improvement. But it's adding in this card that I despise from that set, and Unknowable Past is another card that I really dislike. It's not as toxic to me, but I still don't like it at all. It's a Peril Revelation. You can either reveal 4 Chaos tokens, and then for each symbol revealed, take 1 damage and 1 horror, or you can discard a card and put it in the Exploration deck. And if you draw it from the Exploration deck, you have to pick the other option. Because it's a Peril, you can't even have someone ward this for you. And this is just to take 0 to 4 damage and horror randomly. I've seen both results. I've seen it do literally nothing, and then just gotten hit for 4 by it the next time it came through. On average, it's a fine card, but it's just a really scary, threatening card with a random result, and I don't like that. If you're going to make really scary, scenario-defining, threatening cards, don't make them random, please. So unfortunately, even though I think Shattered Aeons has been improved, a lot of the things added to it I do not like. It's one of the few scenarios where it's not just like an unambiguous thumbs up from me. And Turn Back Time had very little changing about it to begin with, so as in the Return to set, very little will be changing. All the stuff changing here is basically just the Doom OS Teely setup changing here as well, because it's the same map. On the whole though, I think Forgotten Age is made vastly better by the Return to set. I might not like Heart of the Elders Part 1 or Boundary Beyond, but I think they're vastly improved in the Return to set. The better scenarios aren't changed much, but they didn't need to be. Doom vs. Teely and Threads of Fate are both massively improved. Even though I'm not happy about Shattered Aeons, I still think it's a better scenario. I just wish it didn't have the big asterisks on it that I hate this card, or the card from this set. And if anyone did play with this, I would honestly recommend not replacing this set, or just replacing Merging Timelines with a Terran Time. This card is just one of the least pleasant things for me in the entire game, and I despise it. I'm one of the people who's like never really grown too hard about encounter cards. Sometimes you get Crypt Chilled and all you have out in play is Leo DeLuca. You shouldn't have done that. Sometimes you autofill Rotting Remains twice in a row and you die. God hates you, deal with it. But that is a card. This is a card that I just do not care about in any positive fashion. I've got nothing to say about it where it's like, oh, you could have played around it or you got really unlucky. It's just like, oh no, this is going to randomly do something and it's probably going to be really bad. And I despise it. I despise it so much. To an irrational level. It is the thing that I groan about, and it's one of the few that really gets to me. Which makes me very happy that it has the caveat of, you don't have to run with this. No one's forcing you to, just run the original set. Which is something I would recommend to anyone coming into this. But aside from that tirade of me just hating that card, the worst scenarios in the set are made tolerable. The best scenarios are made better, and a lot of scenarios are improved really meaningfully. And before I wrap up this video, whenever I finish a campaign on this channel, I always add it to my tier list. And this may have changed a little bit since last you saw it. It's still largely the same. Some things move up as they grow on my heart, some things move down as I mellow on them a little bit. But it's largely the same tier list. We're also going to be ranking War of the Outer Gods tonight, since that is a scenario that I played recently and haven't added to the tier list yet because it's just a standalone. Starting with the Untamed Wilds, I think it is a great scenario. I don't think it's one of the best, but it, to me, is a degrees of completion scenario similar to Midnight Mask. Instead of the objective like Midnight Mask, it's just the victory point locations of Untamed Wilds. But that's still a degrees of completion scenario, at least for me. And I like the level of challenge it throws at you. I like that the threats it gives you are very varied in how they are affecting you and how you deal with them. It's a really good scenario to me. The fact that it's this low on the tier list is more a credit to these scenarios than anything to do with Untamed Wilds not being incredible. I personally am much hotter on the opening to Forgotten Age than most people are. Next up, we have the Doom of Estile, and for a while I was having a hard time figuring out where to place this, until I renamed A tier Great But, and then I knew exactly where to put it. Because I actually like the Doom of Estile more than Untamed Wilds. Both playing it and the idea of it, I just like it more. They're both very similar scenarios in terms of how you're interacting with the Explorer deck, and the reason I ultimately put it lower is something that Curtain Call has in common with it. The scenario can be solved. With Curtain Call, there are specific ways you play where all the threats are minimized and the scenario is not that hard. And the Doom of Estile is similar. If you know that the chase sequence is coming up, then you know how to position yourselves to get through the scenario as fast as possible. And you also know about certain cards, Pendant of the Queen being a prime example, that just mitigate the threat entirely. So while I do really, really like the Doom of Estile, it has enough mechanical problems in its design where it's solvable and cheesable that I actually meaningfully think it's a worse scenario because of that. And while you might not agree with me on Untamed Wilds and Doom of Estile, I think most people agree that Threads of Fate is a really damn good scenario. I don't think I can put it much higher than Untamed Wilds, because the Paladin Mask and Too Deep and Unspeakable Oath are all absolutely fantastic. I think maybe I could see this sliding around like that. I think N2 Deep might be a little bit too simple to be as high as I'm ranking it, and Threads of Fate has... I think I like moving N2 Deep down, but not so much Threads of Fate up. Threads of Fate is just Midnight Mask, but better. That's pretty much a very good summary of the scenario. Rather than finding the cultist, you're progressing 4 different act decks, but you're still in Arkham. You've got similar encounter sets going on, and I love the scenario. I have very little bad to say about it. Unlike what's coming up next, because the question isn't does Boundary Beyond belong low on the tier list, it's how low does it deserve to be. Return 2 is a substantial improvement to the scenario. Before I actually would have put it... No, I'd still have put it above Undimensioned and Unseen, I'll be honest with you. Undimensioned and Unseen is genuinely an awful scenario. I think it's always worse than Boundary Beyond, but I think maybe with the Return 2 improvements, I don't think it's awful anymore. I think it's just bad. I think Undimensioned and Unseen might be the only scenario that gets to live in F tier. It's actually just Undimensioned and Unseen tier. I think that's actually the case. I don't think that the Boundary Beyond is comparable to it. The Boundary Beyond has issues, and I understand not liking it. But I think that saying that it's as bad as Undimensioned and Unseen might be untrue with the Return 2 set. Don't get me wrong, I'd still rather play literally any other scenario except Undimensioned and Unseen. But I think it's a lot closer in quality to things like Where Doom Awaits and The Devourer Below than something like Undimensioned and Unseen. Yeah, good job, Return 2. You got the Boundary Beyond out of the F tier. I mean, not by much, but you did it. Heart of the Elders Part 1 is also going to be living somewhere low on this tier list, unfortunately. The plethora of vengeance enemies to the point that fighting is just getting vengeance in this scenario can be really awkward, especially at higher player counts where it's going to be harder to deal with all of them. And you're going to be getting them faster as well. That said, with Heart of the Elders Part 1, I actually really enjoyed it when I played it on the channel because I was playing a pair of Seekers that had very non-traditional answers to enemies to begin with, and it felt like a really fun puzzle scenario, but how to evade all the enemies and finish the scenario as quickly as possible. And when it's that sort of gimmick scenario about outracing the enemies and just getting what you need and getting out before they catch up to you, that's actually really cool, and to be honest, no other scenario really plays like that. Based on this ranking, it's probably to their benefit, but it is unique. And the way it's unique isn't necessarily bad design, it just ends up being unfun. I think I'd much rather play Heart of the Elders over Miskatonic Museum or Where Doom Awaits. I'm always going to sigh as I play Miskatonic Museum and go through the motions. Heart of the Elders can actually be engaging, though. It's not better than Devourer Below, though, because Devourer Below might be hard in a mean way, but it is engaging. which is all Heart of the Elder says going for it if I don't like this many Vengeance enemies, and that is the case. There's too many Vengeance enemies. I feel like a third of the deck is Vengeance enemies in this scenario, and that sucks. It's not fun. With Heart of the Elders Part 2, it's a much better scenario, because there's actually enemies in it that aren't just Vengeance enemies. It's a pretty small map, so the explore mechanic's really not doing a whole lot. In any other scenario, if the map were this small, you'd be like, holy shit, what a tiny map. The explore mechanic's required for this map to feel big enough to be a whole map. Like, it's got, what, 7 locations? That's not much more than the Gathering has. Return to Gathering, I mean. Heart of the Elders Part 2 just really doesn't have a lot going on in it. It's good. It has nothing in it that I dislike, and it's just fun gameplay. I think a lot of the reason that people might not like Heart of the Elders Part 2 is because they're just burnt out on the explore mechanic. That's a big part of why my group initially didn't like Forgotten Age entirely. We hated Explore, and we were burnt out on Explore, which we didn't like initially. But now with the Return to set, I actually like the Explore mechanic. And I'm not burnt out on it. I've got a much greater tolerance to a lot of things in Arkham Horror at this point, but that includes the Explore mechanic. I think it's good. I think I'd rather play it than anything in C tier. I think Into the Maelstrom obviously deserves to be higher than that. In fact, I might move Into the Maelstrom and Essex County up to be at the bottom of B tier. I'll leave it like that for now. I think that Heart of the Elders is something I want to play less than all this stuff, but more than these. That's not true. I want to play it less than Into the Maelstrom. That's the catalyst for me moving this up, is realizing that maybe Into the Maelstrom deserves to be like bottom of B tier, just barely. Yeah, I like this. City of Archives. Man, I am conflicted on this scenario. I could see putting it anywhere from right below Horror and High Gear to, and I'm not joking, above Threads of Fate. I don't think anyone else would ever rate City of Archives that highly, but I honestly really, really like the scenario. I like that it's a sort of deck building pressure put on the campaign. There are very few things in campaigns that pressure you to build certain kinds of decks. You just build your character the best they can be and you're done. And I like things that say, hey, you need to care about X, and you build your deck differently. And this does that. You have to build around skills because this is in the campaign. It's really important. However, it is still a gimmick scenario. The fact that the players aren't allowed to play with the character cards they built their deck around does feel pretty bad. I'm honestly having a really hard time saying why City of Archives should be lower than this, other than it just sucks to not have your Investigator card. There are a couple of unique items that could be removed from your deck that would be really unpleasant. The only one coming to mind immediately is the Black Fan, but if you spent 6 experience on that, you're going to be pretty salty when it leaves. There are a couple of characters like Bob, they're going to be really unhappy when half their deck is unplayable for the first half of the scenario. And any big money, not committing skills Krios character in green is going to have a terrible time in this. And I think there are like enough things that are just a little bit unpleasant around City of Archives that I can't put it into my A tier. It's great, but it's never more than that. And looking at it, I don't think I can put it above Lost in Time and Space, but I do think I can put it above Pit of Despair. And I'm going to move Horror and High Gear up here to live closer to City of Archives. Because great, but makes me feel better about Horror and High Gear being up here. It's great, but it's a gimmick scenario, and I don't like the fact that it's really ruining the movement abilities of the game and changing how you play Arkham in the ways that it does. Yeah, I like this. I like City of Archives being here, and Horror and High Gear being shortly behind it. Next up, we have the Depths of Yoth. I'm actually really happy that Depths of Yoth went how it did on my channel, even though it was to some degree a culmination of various mistakes I made both in and against my favor. Depths of Yoth is a fantastic scenario. I'm sure there are other scenarios, but I don't know of them, where the resign condition is just called dying. I love that you resign by just getting knocked out and falling into the Depths of Yoth. I love being chased down the caverns in the Depths of Yoth by the snakes. You can see them above you coming towards you. I love how nightmarishly hard the last 2 agendas are. I love the way that Yig's Fury works as a mechanic, the payoff for all the snakes. I love that I can point to my campaign and be like, if we had one more agenda, we go from like getting crushed and barely standing a chance of getting out to easily winning. I love everything about the Depths of Yoth. It's a little bit unfortunate that it can be sort of repetitive, but seeing as you're pulling 5 random locations, or even 4 random locations out of 9, and then doing that 4 times, it really shouldn't be that repetitive. The locations shouldn't be getting repeated too much. It's just that you're doing the same thing. Explore, find the depths, go down, over and over again. And I can see someone disliking it because of that, but I don't mind that at all. Which reminds me, I'm going to go check something on Tabletop Sim real quick. Okay, I've been at it long enough. I spent like 5 minutes on this. I've been moving things around, trying to figure out if there's any way to build an actual map under the depths of Yoth, or if it really is just a tangle of caverns. It looks like it's just a tangle of caverns. If you put the depths of Yoth in here, it gets much worse. I haven't found any way to organize these where it doesn't just turn into a nightmare with something reaching across the map. And that seems like how it's supposed to be, but I was wondering if there was a map in here I just hadn't been able to visualize. It sure seems like there is no map that is properly displayed in 2 dimensions, because there's always be something reaching across the map like this, or that, or these, or those. There's so many different connections that it's just a tangle of caverns. And I actually prefer it that way, but I was wondering mechanically if it did form a map, there were just like multiple points on every level. It's definitely not the latter. It's just a tangle of caverns, which I actually quite like, even if it is a nightmare to figure out where what is. But yeah, I like everything about the Depths of Yoth. I like its flavor. I like the lack of a map, to be honest. I like how much pressure there is from the enemies and the need to go further down to get better results. I like how insanely threatening the last 2 agendas are. I like Yig's Fury. I like everything about this area. And as you can see, over time, Dim Carcosa has grown on me and the Last King has waned. Dim Carcosa is an absolute banger of a scenario. The problem is that previously, when I was evaluating Dim Carcosa, I was evaluating it based on a 50 experience Lily deck that hits Cyclopean Hammer turn 1, and then 100 experience Jenny deck, which just steamrolled through the scenario and ruined the challenge of it. But on a more normal result, or on a Doubt run, which is probably just a better run, Dim Carcosa is probably better than Depths of Yoth. Right now, though, until I play that Doubt run, I'm actually putting Depths of Yoth as my best scenario. I know it's not my favorite scenario, we just haven't done Circle and done yet to talk about Black Throne. Got a whole video on that. But of the campaigns I've played on the channel, I think Depths of Yoth is actually the best one. Doubt Carcosa might get put to the top, though, once we finally play that. Shattered Aeons is... Oh, man. Shattered Aeons really deserves to be pretty high on the tier list, but I don't know if I can put it anywhere above A. Okay, I think that you judge scenarios based on their best version. And I really dislike Shattered Aeons, in large part because of merging timelines, feeling like it's just too much and it's not fair for the players. But if you aren't playing with merging timelines, you're allowed to just flip that back to the original encounter set and take a tear in time. It's a much better scenario. It does admittedly still have a peril card that says take 0 to 8 damage, which is not a thing I'm a fan of. But I like the scenario. I like the constant spawning of bosses, the huge number of enemies, the frantic fighting pace of it. The fact that you have to find all these clues, but you have to be able to do it independently. If you explore for your clue, you're just punishing them and dealing them horror damage. You can't do that. I like the very different pace it has, and I really think merging timelines is what was keeping it out of my A+ tier. I think it gets higher on the tier list when I remove that card from the scenario. I think it gets over in Too Deep, but it doesn't get over Threads of Fate. Turn Back Time fixes what's wrong with Doom of Estili, because the chase sequence is no longer there to be cheesed out. Instead, it's just a big boss fight with Yig. It might be an A+ scenario that is worse than Midnight Mask, is how I'm kind of feeling. I like the catharsis of it. I like that you show up and Yig's Fury doesn't matter anymore, so you just kill every snake you see. Just no penalty, just go murdering. Because you spent an entire campaign stressing about this, it's nice to just kill all the snakes. I like the Harbinger is just a huge boss you have to think about now, and you completely reevaluate how you deal with him in this scenario. I like replaying the Doom of Estili and seeing just how much your decks have grown since the beginning at a thematic level. I really like in Return to the little subplot with the key that, yeah, it does invalidate this scenario a little bit. It makes it way faster and easier. But it's also just cool that if you ace a campaign, you have just like an ace up your sleeve for the final scenario. I really like everything about Turn Back Time. And I'm having a hard time giving complaints about it, but I still don't feel like it's much better than Midnight Mask if it's better at all. And the main complaint against it is we've already seen this map. We've already fought Yig. You're sort of retreading old steps. That's the thing that's great, but it's a victory lap. But it's probably the best victory lap imaginable. It doesn't get to live in my A+ tier, but it is a great scenario despite my complaints. And lastly, we have War of the Outer Gods. I think that I want to put War of the Outer Gods right near the top of A. It's a great scenario, but it feels a little bit gamey. The map is too symmetrical. The enemy factions are a little bit too coded to always do the same sort of thing. The same things that make it feel like good game design make it feel like unimmersive Arkham horror. the flavor is greatly sacrificed for the things that feel like good game design in it, and it really hurts it. Like, every other scenario in A tier has much better flavor than this. Tremendously better flavor than this, actually. But mechanically, it's a really high variance scenario. It's a testing ground for higher experience decks. I like it quite a lot, and it has serious problems, which is what this tier is really for. And I think I'm happy with putting War of the Outer Gods right near the top of it. I originally planned on putting it at the very top, but I think Turn Back Time gets that spot. There's a lot of bad things in Dunwich, Undimensioned and Unseen, and Where Doom Awaits, and Miskatonic Museum. Like, there are a lot of low points there. But the low points in Forgotten Age are pretty much just as bad. They're better, and there's not as many, but they're still real bad. But the high points in it are so good. Depths of Yaw, the majority of the campaign just lives like in the middle of A or higher, right? City of Archives, Doom of Estili, Turn Back Time, Untamed Wild, Shattered Aeons, and Threads of Fate. 6 of 10 scenarios are hanging out in A to A+. That's wild. And then we have one, like, top of S tier fantastic scenario, one relatively weak scenario, and then 2 genuinely bad ones. Forgotten Age has just, like, very high average scenario quality, at least for my taste. It has some really genuinely fantastic scenarios and some pretty harsh low points right in the middle. But of the campaigns I've played on the channel, and I'm shocked to say this, because when I first started playing stuff on the channel, I hadn't replayed Forgotten Age. On the stuff on the channel so far, Forgotten Age has been my favorite campaign. Carcosa might be better. You need someone who isn't Jenny, who just invalidates the second half of the campaign because they have an entire extra character worth of experience. But in another campaign, the second half of Carcosa would be much more engaging than it was in my run. And I think a Doubt run of Carcosa is probably just the better version of Carcosa to begin with. So I think when I do Doubt Carcosa, it might be very similar or even better to Forgotten Age. Forgotten Age is fantastic, though. I didn't realize quite how much I liked it until I had to sit down and rank them for the tier list, but I absolutely love Forgotten Age. Which is really surprising to me, because it was our least favorite campaign the first time through. But the Return to is also a lot of why it's moved up so much. The Return to is a vast improvement over the original set. Anyway, that's it for me. I've been Ryan the Coherent, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Whether you were here for the Return to review or the tier list update, either way, I hope it was content you found enjoyable, and I'll see you in the next one.